Emma Collins had always believed in love at first sight, though she never expected it would happen to her in a greasy auto repair shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She was 27 years old, living the life everyone told her she should want: a successful marketing career, a stylish apartment in the city's trendy district, and a calendar full of social obligations that looked impressive but left her feeling empty. Something was missing, though she couldn't quite name what it was. Perhaps it was authenticity, or maybe it was simply the feeling that someone saw her as more than a resume and a last name. Her car had broken down 3 blocks from her office, sputtering and coughing before dying completely at a red light. The check engine light had been flickering for days, but Emma had been too busy to deal with it, always telling herself she'd handle it tomorrow. Now, tomorrow had arrived with a vengeance. After calling a tow truck and suffering through the embarrassment of holding up traffic while annoyed drivers honked and swerved around her, she found herself at Mike's Auto Repair, a small garage tucked between a laundromat and a convenience store in a part of town she rarely visited. It was the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors' names, where corner stores still existed, where life moved at a different pace than the corporate towers downtown. The shop was modest but welcoming in its own way, with oil-stained concrete floors that showed years of honest labor and the sharp metallic smell of motor oil hanging in the air mixed with the scent of coffee brewing somewhere nearby. Tools lined the walls in what looked like organized chaos, each wrench and socket in its designated place despite the worn appearance of the space. A radio played classic rock from somewhere in the back, Fleetwood Mac drifting through the air. Emma stood awkwardly by the front desk, suddenly very aware of how out of place she looked in her tailored designer suit and expensive heels clicking against the floor as she shifted her weight nervously. She checked her watch, calculating how much work time she was losing, how many emails were piling up, how disappointed her boss would be. That's when he walked in from the garage bay, wiping his hands on a red rag that had seen better days. Michael Carter was tall, probably 6 feet, with dark hair that fell slightly into his eyes, giving him a boyish charm, despite the serious set of his jaw. His face carried both youth and something deeper, a kind of wisdom or perhaps weariness that suggested he'd seen more of life than his years might indicate. His navy blue work uniform had his name stitched on the chest in simple white letters, and his hands bore the unmistakable evidence of hard work: grease embedded beneath his fingernails and calluses marking his palms. But it was his eyes that caught Emma's attention, warm brown eyes that held kindness and intelligence and a hint of something she couldn't quite identify. Later, she would realize it was loneliness, the kind that comes from being surrounded by people but never truly known. "You're the one with the sedan?" he asked, his voice warm and unpretentious. Emma nodded. "Yes, that's me. It just died on me out of nowhere." He smiled, and something about that smile made her heart skip. It wasn't a practiced smile or a flirtatious one. It was genuine, the kind that reached his eyes and made small lines appear at their corners. "Let me take a look. These things usually aren't as bad as they seem," he said, gesturing for her to follow him to where her car had been towed. For the next hour, Emma watched him work, fascinated by the way his hands moved with such confidence and precision. He explained everything he was doing in terms she could understand, never talking down to her or using complicated jargon to make himself sound more knowledgeable, never treating her like just another customer who wouldn't understand the technical details. When he discovered the problem, a relatively simple fix involving a faulty sensor, he quoted her a fair price that was actually lower than she'd expected based on her previous experiences with mechanics. There was no attempt to upsell her on services she didn't need, no scare tactics about potential disasters if she didn't replace half the parts in her engine. "You're good at this," Emma said, leaning against the wall as she watched him replace a part under the hood. She'd forgotten all about the emails waiting for her, the meetings she was missing. For the first time in months, maybe years, She was fully present in the moment. Michael glanced up, a streak of grease across his cheek, making him look even more human somehow. Been doing it since I was 16. My old man taught me everything about cars. He used to say that if you understand how something works, you respect it more. He'd spend hours showing me each piece, explaining how it all fit together, how every part had a purpose. I think he was trying to teach me about more than just engines. That's a beautiful philosophy, Emma replied, genuinely moved. My father never taught me anything except how to network and which fork to use at fancy dinners. Michael laughed at that, a real laugh that reached his eyes. Well, those are useful skills too, I suppose. Different worlds, different tools. What about you? What do you do? He asked, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he tightened a bolt. I work in marketing downtown. Nothing as hands-on as this. Mostly just staring at computer screens and trying to convince people they need things they probably don't. Creating desire where none existed before. Some days I wonder if I'm actually helping anyone or just contributing to the noise. He paused in his work, looking at her with genuine interest. At least you're honest about it. Most people in suits who come in here act like their work is saving the world. They talked as he worked, and Emma found herself drawn into the conversation in a way that rarely happened with strangers. Michael wasn't like the men she usually met at corporate events or through her social circle, men who spent conversations looking over her shoulder for someone more important to talk to. He didn't boast about his accomplishments or name drop to impress her. He spoke about his work with pride but humility, about the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken and sending people back on the road safely. He told her about regular customers who'd been coming to him for years, about the single mom whose car he'd fixed at cost because she was struggling, about the elderly man who stopped by just to chat because he was lonely. When he finished, he lowered the hood and started the engine. It purred smoothly, all traces of its earlier problems gone. Good as new, he said, wiping his hands again. That should hold you for a long time. Emma paid the surprisingly reasonable bill, but as she got into her car, she hesitated. Thank you, Michael. You really saved my day. Just doing my job, he replied, but there was that smile again. She drove away, but she couldn't stop thinking about the mechanic with the kind eyes and honest smile. It was ridiculous, she told herself. They were from completely different worlds. She had a corner office and expense accounts. He worked in a garage that probably barely stayed afloat. Yet something about him had touched something in her that all the successful executives and ambitious professionals she knew had never reached. 3 days later, her car made a strange noise. It was probably nothing, Emma told herself, just the vehicle settling in with the new part like Michael had mentioned, but she found herself driving back to Mike's auto repair, her heart beating faster as she pulled into the lot. Michael looked surprised, but genuinely pleased to see her, his face lighting up in a way that made her stomach flip. Back so soon? Is something wrong? He asked, immediately concerned, already reaching for his tools. There's this sound, Emma said, though in truth she wasn't entirely sure there was. She'd been listening so intently to every noise her car made that she might have imagined it. A kind of clicking when I turn left. He checked the car thoroughly, test-driving it around the block, listening carefully to every sound it made. He found nothing wrong, but he didn't make her feel foolish for coming in. He didn't charge her for the inspection or make her feel like she'd wasted his time. Instead, he offered her a cup of coffee from the pot in the small office that doubled as a waiting room. I think your car is just settling in with the new part, he said as they stood in the garage, paper cups in hand. The coffee was terrible, burnt and bitter, but Emma didn't care. But if you hear it again, come back any time. Better safe than sorry. Can I ask you something? Emma said suddenly, the question tumbling out before she could second-guess it. Why do you do this? I mean, you're clearly smart and capable. You could probably do anything. Haven't you ever wanted to do something else? Something that pays more, has more prestige? Michael considered the question thoughtfully, his gaze drifting to the cars in various states of repair around them. I've thought about it. My mom used to worry that I wasn't living up to my potential, whatever that means. But there's something satisfying about this work that I can't really explain to people who've never done it. When someone comes in here stressed because their car broke down, worried about the cost, worried about getting to work or picking up their kids, worried about how they'll manage if it's expensive, and I can fix it and make it affordable and reliable, that matters. I'm not saving lives like a doctor. I'm not teaching the next generation like a teacher. But I'm helping people get through their day. I'm solving problems. I'm making things work again. That means something to me. It's honest work, you know? At the end of the day, I can see what I've accomplished. I've made something better than it was. Emma felt something shift in her chest. In a world where everyone she knew was chasing promotions, bigger salaries, and status symbols, here was a man who found meaning in service and honest work. Over the following weeks, Emma found more and more reasons to stop by the garage. A question about tire pressure that she could have easily Googled, advice about when to get an oil change that she already knew the answer to, a weird smell that she was pretty sure she'd imagined. Each visit stretched longer, filled with conversation and laughter that came easily and naturally. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their favorite movies and music, their philosophies on life. Michael began to expect her visits, always lighting up when she walked through the door, always finding time in his schedule to talk even when he was busy. His coworker, an older man named Tony, would grin knowingly whenever Emma showed up, giving Michael good-natured ribbing about his favorite customer. Emma found herself thinking about Michael constantly. At work meetings, she'd drift off, remembering something funny he'd said. At dinner with friends, she'd compare their shallow conversations to the depth she found talking with Michael in a garage. She started looking forward to her commute home, hoping her car would give her an excuse to stop by. She'd never felt this way before, this sense of anticipation and possibility. Finally, 6 weeks after they first met, Michael asked her to dinner. He'd been working up the courage for days, Tony encouraging him to just do it already, but every time Emma came by, he'd lose his nerve. Finally, on a Friday evening, when she stopped by, allegedly to ask about a dashboard warning light, he just went for it. I know a place, he said, a bit nervously, wiping his hands on his work pants, even though they were already clean. Nothing fancy, but the food is really good. Would you maybe want to go with me? Not as a customer, just as Emma? Maybe tomorrow night? Her heart soared, and she had to stop herself from squealing with delight. I'd love to. I'd really, really love to. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in his neighborhood called Mama Rosa's. The tablecloths were plastic red and white checked, and the menu was written on a chalkboard behind the counter. But the moment Emma walked in, she felt embraced by warmth and authenticity. The owner, an elderly Italian woman who actually was named Rosa, greeted Michael with a kiss on both cheeks and frank appraisal of Emma. "So you finally bring a nice girl," she said in heavily accented English. "It's about time, Michael. You work too much." The food was incredible. Homemade pasta that melted in your mouth, sauce that tasted like it had been simmering for days, bread that was still warm from the oven. And the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, filled with the chatter of families and the clatter of dishes and the smell of garlic and basil. They talked for hours, their conversation flowing as easily as it had in the garage, but with a new dimension now that they were officially on a date. Michael told her about growing up in a working-class family, though he was vague about some details in ways Emma didn't quite understand at the time. He told her about learning responsibility early, about working part-time jobs through high school, about dreams he'd had and the paths he'd chosen. He spoke about his relationship with his father, complicated and loving, about lessons learned the hard way. Emma shared her own story, about pressure from her family to succeed, about a childhood spent in private schools where achievement mattered more than happiness. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" Michael asked her over tiramisu they were sharing. "Sometimes," Emma admitted. "Actually, a lot lately. My parents had this whole plan for me. The right schools, the right career, eventually the right marriage to the right kind of man. Someone from a good family with prospects. I've been following that plan for so long, I'm not sure I know what I actually want anymore." "What do you think you want?" he asked gently. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, at his kind face, his attentive eyes, the way he listened like her words actually mattered. "I think I want something real, something that's mine, not anyone else's expectations." He reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough from work, but his touch was gentle. "I think you deserve that." They began dating seriously after that night. Emma's friends were skeptical at first, their reactions ranging from concern to outright horror. When she brought Michael to a cocktail party hosted by one of her colleagues 3 weeks into their relationship, she could feel the judgment radiating from every corner of the room. Her coworkers, dressed in expensive designer labels, holding craft cocktails that cost more than Michael probably made in an hour, looked at him like he was a curiosity. Michael, to his credit, was gracious and polite, but Emma could see he was uncomfortable. He'd worn his nicest clothes, dress pants and a button-down shirt that was perfectly clean but obviously not designer, and next to the men in their tailored suits, he looked out of place. "So, Michael, what do you do?" someone asked with barely concealed condescension. "I'm a mechanic. I own a small auto repair shop," Michael replied with quiet dignity. "How quaint," the person said, already turning away to find more interesting conversation. Emma excused them early, furious and embarrassed, though not at Michael. They sat in his truck in the parking lot afterward, and she could see the hurt in his eyes, even though he was trying to hide it. "I'm sorry," she said. "They were awful to you." "They weren't awful," Michael said carefully. "They just don't know what to make of me. I don't fit in their world, Emma. Maybe that matters." "It doesn't matter to me," Emma insisted fiercely. "Their world is shallow and fake, and I'm tired of pretending I belong in it." Later that night, her friend Rachel cornered her in the bathroom, her voice urgent and concerned. "Emma, what are you doing? A mechanic? Really?" Rachel whispered urgently, checking to make sure no one else was in the bathroom. "You could have any successful man in the city, lawyers, doctors, executives, men who could give you the life you're accustomed to. Why are you slumming it with a guy who changes oil for a living?" Emma felt anger rise in her chest, hot and protective. "He's not slumming it. He's hard-working, kind, intelligent, and he treats me better than any of those lawyers or executives ever did. He listens when I talk, Rachel, actually listens. He doesn't see me as arm candy or a networking opportunity. He sees me, just me. Why does his job matter so much to you?" "Because you're settling," Rachel insisted. "You have so much potential, and you're throwing it away on someone who will never be able to give you the life you deserve." "The life I deserve?" Emma repeated. "Or the life you think looks good? Michael makes me happy, Rachel, actually happy. When was the last time you could say that about any relationship you've been in?" Rachel had no answer for that, and Emma walked out of the bathroom with her head held high. The reaction from her parents was even worse. When Emma brought Michael home for dinner 6 months into their relationship, she knew it would be challenging, but she hadn't anticipated just how painful it would be. Her parents lived in an exclusive neighborhood, in a house that Emma had grown up in, a sprawling mansion with manicured lawns and rooms that were more for show than for living. The moment Michael arrived in his 10-year-old truck, wearing his nicest shirt and holding flowers for Patricia, Emma could see her parents exchange a look of dismay through the front window. Her mother's smile was fixed and polite as she accepted the flowers. Her father's handshake was perfunctory and cold. Dinner was painfully awkward from the very beginning. The dining room was formal, with china that was probably worth more than Michael's truck, crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier, and enough silverware that Emma saw Michael hesitate, unsure which fork to use. Emma wanted to reach across the table and hold his hand, to tell him it didn't matter, but she knew that would only make things worse. Richard asked Michael pointed questions about his business, his education, his prospects. Each question designed to highlight the gap between Michael and the kind of man they'd hoped Emma would bring home. Michael answered honestly and without defensiveness, explaining that he owned the small garage where he worked, that he'd gone to community college for 2 years but hadn't finished because he needed to work full-time when his father got sick, that he made enough to live comfortably, but no, he didn't have investments or retirement accounts or a 5-year plan for expansion. "So you're basically living paycheck to paycheck?" Richard said bluntly, cutting into his steak with unnecessary force. "No savings, no security, no plan for the future." "Dad," Emma warned, her voice sharp with anger. "I'm just trying to understand your situation, young man," Richard continued, not even looking at Emma. "My daughter has been given every advantage in life. The best schools, the best education, connections that most people can only dream of. She has a promising career, financial security, a bright future. What exactly can you offer her? What happens if you get injured and can't work? What happens when you want to start a family? Can you even afford health insurance?" Michael didn't flinch, though Emma could see his jaw tighten slightly. "With respect, sir, I can't offer her wealth or status or the lifestyle she's accustomed to. I won't pretend I can. I can offer her honesty, loyalty, and love. I can offer her a partner who will work hard every day to build a life together, who will respect her and support her dreams. I can offer her someone who values her for who she is, not what she has or who her family is. I know that's not enough in your eyes, and I understand why, but it's all I have, and it's real." The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia looked like she might faint. Richard's face turned red. "Emma, may I speak with you in the study?" her father said, standing abruptly. In the wood-paneled study that smelled of old books, expensive cigars, and generations of privilege, her father didn't hold back. He paced back and forth, his face red, his voice rising with each sentence. "This is completely unacceptable," he said, his hands gesturing sharply. "That man has nothing to offer you. Nothing. Do you understand what you'd be signing up for? A life of financial stress, constantly worrying about money, no security, no future, no stability? Your mother and I worked hard to give you opportunities, to ensure you'd never have to struggle, and you're throwing them away on a man who will never be anything more than a grease monkey working in a garage that could go under at any moment. What happens when you want children? What kind of life can he provide for them? What kind of example is he setting?" "Don't call him that," Emma said, her voice shaking with anger and hurt and disappointment. "Michael is worth 10 of the trust fund babies and corporate climbers you've been pushing at me for years. He's genuine, Dad. He's honest and kind and hardworking. He cares about me, really cares about me, not my connections or my family's money or what I can do for his career. Can you honestly say that about any of the men you've introduced me to? The ones who spent dinner talking about their portfolios? The ones who saw me as a trophy wife to show off at business dinners? Love doesn't pay the bills, Emma. Love doesn't secure your future. Love doesn't put food on the table or pay the mortgage or send children to good schools, Richard shot back. I've seen too many bright young women throw their lives away on men who couldn't provide for them, who had big hearts but empty wallets. You think love is enough now? But wait until you're struggling to make ends meet, until you're worried about how to pay for basic necessities, until you're embarrassed to tell your friends where you live or what kind of car you drive. No, but it makes life worth living, Emma shot back. I'd rather struggle with someone I love than be comfortable with someone I don't. I'm 28 years old, and for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice based on what I want, not what you want. I love Michael, and that's not going to change because you disapprove. The argument ended with Emma and Michael leaving early. In the truck on the way home, Michael was quiet. "I'm sorry," Emma said softly. "They were horrible to you." "They're worried about you," Michael replied, though his voice was strained. "They want you to have a good life. I can't blame them for thinking I'm not good enough for you." "Don't say that," Emma insisted, touching his arm. "You are good enough. You're more than good enough. They just can't see past their own narrow definition of success." "Maybe they're right, though," Michael said, staring at the road ahead. "Maybe you deserve someone who can give you more than I can." Emma's heart clenched. "Pull over." "What?" "Pull over, right now." Michael pulled the truck into a shopping center parking lot, mostly empty at this late hour. Emma turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Listen to me, Michael Carter. I don't care about money. I don't care about status or security or any of the things my parents think matter. I care about you, the way you treat people with kindness and respect, the way you find joy in your work, the way you make me laugh and listen when I talk and hold me when I'm sad. That's what matters. That's what makes a good life. Do you understand?" His eyes were bright with emotion. "I love you, Emma, more than I ever thought I could love anyone. But I don't want to be the reason you lose your family." "You're not," Emma said firmly. "They're making their own choices, just like I'm making mine. And I choose you. I will always choose you." He pulled her into a kiss then, and in that parking lot under the streetlights, Emma knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right decision. The next year was both challenging and beautiful, full of small joys and difficult moments. Emma's parents cut back their contact significantly, making it clear through their absence and short, formal phone calls that they disapproved of the relationship. Her mother would call occasionally, always with the same underlying message. "It's not too late to reconsider. You deserve better. We're just worried about your future." Her social circle slowly shifted, as some friends drifted away, unable to understand her choice or unwilling to associate with someone dating below their perceived station. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. Her name was dropped from certain guest lists. But Emma had never been happier, never felt more alive or more herself. She spent evenings at the garage, bringing Michael dinner from various restaurants and keeping him company as he worked late to meet deadlines or help customers in emergency situations. She'd sit in the small office, working on her laptop while he worked on cars, and they'd talk during his breaks, sharing their days, their thoughts, their dreams. He taught her about cars, patiently explaining how engines worked, what different sounds meant, how to check her own oil and tire pressure. She taught him about marketing and social media, helping him create a better online presence for his business. She designed a simple website for the garage, managed his social media accounts, and helped him connect with customers in new ways. The garage's business actually grew during this time, as Emma's marketing skills brought in new customers and Michael's quality work kept them coming back. They took long drives on weekends, exploring small towns within a few hours of the city, stopping at diners with checkered floors and jukebox music, visiting antique shops and farmers markets. They cooked together in his tiny apartment above a deli, danced in the kitchen to old songs on the radio, watched movies cuddled on his second-hand couch. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in silences and animated in discussions. They learned each other's quirks, Michael's habit of humming while he worked, Emma's tendency to reorganize things, his love of old rock music, her secret passion for trashy reality TV. They shared their fears and insecurities, their past heartbreaks and disappointments, their hopes for the future. 13 months after their first date, on a beautiful Saturday in September, Michael proposed. There was no fancy restaurant or elaborate plan, no photographer hiding in the bushes or flash mob appearing out of nowhere. They were at the beach at sunset, a small, rocky beach about an hour from the city that had become their special place. They'd been coming here every few weeks, bringing sandwiches and sitting on the rocks, watching the waves and talking about life. It was their sanctuary, away from judgmental eyes and societal expectations. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks and purples, the kind of sunset that makes you believe in beauty and possibility. They were walking along the shore, shoes in hand, letting the cold water wash over their feet. Michael had been quieter than usual all day, and Emma had noticed but didn't press. She'd learned that he sometimes just needed space to think, to process things in his own time. He simply stopped walking, took both her hands in his, and looked at her with such intensity and love that Emma felt her breath catch. His hands were trembling slightly, and she could see the emotion in his eyes. "Emma Collins," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "you've made me the happiest man in the world. Every day with you has been a gift I never thought I deserved. You saw something in me that no one else did, or maybe you saw the real me that I'd forgotten existed. You chose me when choosing me cost you friendships and strained your family relationships. You stood by me when everyone told you I wasn't good enough. You loved me not for what I could give you, but for who I am. I don't have much to offer except my heart, but it's yours, completely, forever. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, whatever that life looks like?" The ring was simple, a small diamond on a silver band that caught the dying light of the sunset. Later, Michael would tell her that he'd saved up for months to buy it, that he'd worked extra hours and taken on additional jobs, that he'd wanted to give her something beautiful, even if it couldn't compete with the jewelry her family was accustomed to. But in that moment, Emma didn't see the size of the stone or calculate its value. She saw only what it represented: love, commitment, a future chosen freely, a promise made without coercion or expectation. Emma cried as she said yes, not because the ring was small, but because it represented something real and hard-earned and full of love. Planning the wedding was another battle, another series of compromises and difficult conversations. Patricia wanted an elaborate affair at the country club with 300 guests, an orchestra, a 10-tier cake, and all the trappings of society weddings she'd attended for decades. She had lists of vendors, visions of ice sculptures and elaborate centerpieces, dreams of an event that would be talked about for years. Emma wanted something simple and intimate, something that reflected who she and Michael actually were, rather than who society expected them to be. They compromised on a small ceremony at a historic church in town, a beautiful stone building that had stood for over a century, with a reception at a modest but elegant venue nearby. The guest list was kept to under 100 people, much to Patricia's dismay. The guest list itself was contentious, every name becoming a negotiation or a battle. Emma invited her friends, knowing many wouldn't come, knowing that some would send polite regrets that barely masked their judgment. She invited her parents, hoping desperately that they would soften their stance, that seeing her happiness might change their minds. She invited Michael's friends from the neighborhood, his regular customers who'd become like family, the guys he played basketball with on Thursday evenings at the community center. It was an eclectic mix that would have horrified her mother's society friends, a collision of worlds that rarely intersected. Emma's co-workers were split in their responses. Some politely declined, claiming prior commitments that may or may not have been real. Others accepted out of curiosity or genuine friendship, eager to see how this unusual love story would unfold. Her boss, surprisingly, sent an enthusiastic acceptance and an expensive gift, with a note saying that anyone who made Emma this happy deserved to be celebrated. As the wedding day approached, Emma felt increasingly peaceful about her decision. She'd seen the kind of marriages her parents' friends had, marriages of convenience and appearance, where couples lived separate lives under the same roof. She dated men who saw her as a trophy or a networking opportunity. Michael saw her as Emma, just Emma, and loved her for exactly who she was. The morning of the wedding, Emma's mother came to see her as she was getting ready. Patricia looked tired, older than her 55 years. "You look beautiful," Patricia said softly, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom," Emma replied, adjusting her simple white dress in the mirror. She'd chosen something elegant but not extravagant, tea-length with delicate lace. "I want you to know something," Patricia continued, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your father and I, we've been married 32 years. We have a beautiful home, financial security, respect in the community. But if I'm being honest, we've never had what I see when you look at that young man. We've never had that kind of love." Emma turned to face her mother, surprised. "I'm not saying I regret my choices," Patricia went on, "but I am saying I understand yours better now. I've watched you this past year, and you glow in a way I've never seen before. He makes you happy, genuinely happy. Maybe that's worth more than I gave it credit for." Mother and daughter embraced, both crying, both understanding that while they might never fully agree, they could still love each other. The church was indeed small, intimate in a way that felt sacred, a 100-year-old building with wooden pews worn smooth by generations of worshipers and stained glass windows that cast colored light across the floor in patterns that shifted with the sun. The windows depicted scenes from Scripture, angels and saints rendered in jewel-toned glass, their faces serene and timeless. As guests arrived, Emma could see the divide clearly, almost like a physical line drawn down the center aisle. On one side, her former colleagues in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, looking slightly uncomfortable in the simple church, checking their phones discreetly, making polite conversation in hushed tones. On the other side, Michael's world, working-class folks in their Sunday best, clothes that might not be designer but were worn with dignity and care, warm and welcoming, greeting each other with genuine affection and loud laughter. Rachel was there, surprisingly, along with a few other friends who'd stuck by Emma despite their doubts and the social cost of supporting her choice. Her parents sat in the front row, her father's expression unreadable, his face set in lines that could have been disapproval or perhaps just deep thought. Her mother dabbing at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief, already emotional before the ceremony had even begun. Tony from the garage was there with his wife and kids, grinning ear to ear, proud as if he'd arranged the whole thing himself. Mrs. Rosa from the Italian restaurant sat in the middle, dressed in her finest black dress, a lace mantilla over her silver hair, beaming with the particular joy of someone who's watched young love blossom. Emma waited in the small room behind the sanctuary, her heart pounding, not with nerves, but with excitement, with anticipation, with the overwhelming rightness of this moment. In minutes, she would marry the man she loved. Nothing else mattered. Not the whispers, not the judgment, not the social consequences, or the financial uncertainties. None of it mattered in the face of what she and Michael had found together. The music started, a string quartet playing a classical piece she'd chosen, and Emma walked down the aisle, alone by her choice. She'd asked her father to walk with her, had extended the olive branch one more time, but when he'd made another speech about it not being too late to reconsider, about how he couldn't in good conscience give her away to a man he didn't believe could care for her, she'd made her decision. She would walk herself into this new chapter of her life, claiming her own choice, owning her own decision. It felt powerful and right, each step deliberate and chosen. Michael stood at the altar, and when Emma saw him, her breath caught in her throat, and tears immediately began streaming down her face. He wore a simple dark suit, probably rented from a shop downtown, nothing custom tailored or expensive, but he looked more handsome than any man she'd ever seen. His dark hair was neatly combed, though one piece had already fallen into his eyes in that familiar way. But it was his expression that undid her completely. His eyes were locked on her with such naked love, such pure devotion, such overwhelming emotion that she felt it like a physical force. He was crying too, not bothering to hide it, tears streaming down his face as he watched her walk toward him. His hands were clasped in front of him to keep them from shaking, and when she finally reached him, he mouthed, "You're beautiful," and she nearly lost her composure entirely. She reached him and took his hands, feeling them tremble in hers. They were both trembling, both crying, both so full of emotion that words seemed inadequate. The officiant, Father Thomas, an elderly priest who'd been at this church for 30 years and had seen countless weddings, smiled at them both with genuine warmth. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying through the small church, "we are gathered here today in the presence of God and these witnesses to join Michael and Emma in the sacred bond of holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, thoughtfully, and in the knowledge that love is not merely a feeling, but a choice we make every day." The ceremony proceeded beautifully, each moment feeling sacred and significant. Emma barely heard the traditional words, so focused was she on Michael's face, on the feel of his hands in hers, on the rightness of this moment. They'd written their own vows, spending weeks crafting words that would express what they felt, reading drafts to each other late at night in his apartment, laughing and crying and revising until they'd captured something real. When it came time to share them, Michael went first, pulling a small piece of paper from his pocket with shaking hands. "Emma," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you came into my life on a rainy Tuesday, and you've been the sunshine in my days ever since. You saw past everything the world said should matter and found something in me worth loving. You've taught me that the richest life isn't measured in money, but in moments like this, in love freely given and gratefully received. I promise to honor you, cherish you, support your dreams, and hold your hand through every challenge life brings us. I promise to work hard every day to be worthy of the gift of your love. You are my best friend, my partner, and now my wife. I love you with everything I am." There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Emma squeezed his hands, her own vows ready. But before she could speak, Michael held up a hand gently. "Wait, before we go any further, before Father Thomas pronounces us married, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you before, but I was afraid." Emma felt her heart skip. The church went silent, every person leaning forward slightly. Whispers started in the back rows. "What is it?" Emma asked, searching his face for clues. Michael took a deep breath. "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am. Emma, I'm not just a mechanic who owns a small garage. My full name is Michael James Carter, and I'm the heir to the Carter Automotive Group." Emma blinked, confused. The Carter Automotive Group was one of the largest automotive empires in the country, a multinational corporation with dealerships, manufacturing plants, and a net worth in the billions. She'd seen their commercials, driven past their dealerships. They were everywhere. "I don't understand," she whispered. Michael's eyes never left hers. "My grandfather founded the company 70 years ago. My father expanded it into what it is today. I was raised with every privilege, went to the best schools, was groomed to take over the company someday. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't know anything about real life, about real people. Everyone around me only cared about money and power and status. I didn't know who my real friends were. I didn't know who I really was." He paused, and Emma could see the vulnerability in his face. "So, 5 years ago, I made a choice. I left it all behind. I took an assumed name, moved to this side of town, and bought that small garage with money I'd saved from working summers as a teenager. I wanted to live a normal life, to see if I could make it on my own, to find out who I really was without the Carter name. My family thought I was crazy, but they agreed to give me time. They're still running the company. I told them I'd come back when I was ready, when I understood what really mattered." The church was in an uproar. Guests were talking over each other. Emma's parents looked stunned. Rachel's mouth was hanging open. But Emma only looked at Michael, her mind racing, pieces clicking into place like a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. Everything made sudden sense. The way he was educated despite saying he dropped out, speaking about literature and history and philosophy in ways that suggested years of expensive private education. The quiet confidence that seemed born of more than just hard work, a certain ease in his own skin that came from never having doubted he could succeed. The fact that his small garage always seemed to have exactly what it needed, never struggling the way small businesses usually did in their first years, never quite as desperate as she'd expected when she'd offered to help with marketing. The vague details about his family, the way he'd skillfully avoided certain questions without seeming evasive. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, and she was surprised to find she wasn't angry, not really, just confused, trying to process this enormous revelation, trying to reconcile the man she knew with this new information. Her hands were still in his, and she hadn't pulled away, which seemed significant somehow. "Because I needed to know," Michael said, and now tears were streaming down his face freely, his voice breaking with emotion. "I needed to know that someone could love me for who I actually am, not for my money or my name or what I could offer them. Every relationship I'd had before, every friendship, every interaction was tainted by the Carter name and what it represented. People saw dollar signs or opportunities or status. No one saw me, Michael, just Michael. They only saw the Carter fortune, the connections, the lifestyle. I'd been used and manipulated so many times by people I thought cared about me that I didn't know if real love even existed for someone like me. He squeezed her hands tighter, his whole body shaking now. But you, Emma, you saw me, the real me. You loved me when you thought I was just a mechanic, barely scraping by, working long hours in a garage for modest pay. You defended me to your parents, knowing it would strain your relationship with them. You lost friends over me, risked your standing in your social circle for me. You chose a life you thought would be modest and simple, maybe even difficult at times, because you loved the man, not the lifestyle. You were willing to give up comfort and security for love. That's all I've ever wanted. Someone who loved me, just me, without conditions or calculations or ulterior motives. Emma felt her own tears flowing freely now. Her mascara probably running, but she didn't care. She understood. Oh, how she understood. Hadn't she spent her whole life wondering if people liked her for herself, or for her family's connections, for her last name, for what she could do for them? Hadn't she questioned every friendship, every date, wondering about ulterior motives? Hadn't she felt the suffocating weight of expectations, of playing a role designed by others? She and Michael were mirrors of each other in so many ways, both running from privilege, both seeking authenticity, both desperately wanting to be seen and loved for who they really were. "You should have told me," she said softly, but there was no anger in her voice, only understanding and a kind, sad empathy. "But I understand why you didn't. I understand completely. And I'm sorry you ever felt like you couldn't trust me with the truth. But I also understand that trust like that takes time to build, especially when you've been hurt before." The church was buzzing now, the noise level rising to the point where Father Thomas was starting to look concerned, probably wondering if he should intervene somehow. Emma could hear her father's voice rising above the others, could see people pulling out phones, probably searching for Michael James Carter, probably looking up the Carter Automotive Group, probably calculating net worth and inheritance. It was exactly the kind of reaction that had driven Michael away from that world in the first place, and Emma felt a surge of protectiveness toward him. She turned to face the gathered crowd, still holding Michael's hands, her voice ringing out clear and strong across the church. The room fell silent almost immediately, everyone stopping mid-conversation, turning to look at the bride who was taking control of her own ceremony. "No, we're not taking a break. I know what everyone is thinking right now. You're thinking I'm either the luckiest woman alive or the most foolish, depending on whether you thought I was making a mistake before. You're calculating what this means, what it changes. But here's what I know, what I've always known. For the past year and a half, I've been with a man who treats me with respect and kindness every single day. A man who listens when I talk, really listens, not just waiting for his turn to speak. A man who makes me laugh, who supports my dreams, who challenges me to be better. A man who works hard, who cares about people, who finds meaning in service. That man is Michael. That's who he is at his core." She turned back to him, her voice softening but no less certain. "I don't care if you have $1 billion or no dollars, Michael. I fell in love with the mechanic in the garage who patiently explained car parts to me and shared terrible coffee from a paper cup. I fell in love with the man who took me to Mama Rosa's and talked to me for hours like I was the most interesting person in the world. I fell in love with someone who chose to live simply, to find authenticity, who gave up wealth and privilege to discover who he really was. That's who you are. The money, the company, the Carter name, that's not you. That's just something your grandfather built, a legacy you inherited. You are the man who rebuilt an engine with care and precision because you wanted to do the job right, not because you needed the money. You are the man who helped that single mother at cost because it was the right thing to do. You are the man I love, with or without the fortune. Michael was openly weeping now, and so was half the church. Even Tony was wiping at his eyes with his tie, and Mrs. Rosa was openly sobbing, calling out, "Beautiful, so beautiful," in Italian. You mean you still want to marry me? Even knowing I lied about who I was? Even knowing I kept this massive secret from you? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his fear and hope equally evident. You didn't lie, Emma said gently, firmly, wanting him to really hear this. You simplified. You protected yourself. You gave me a version of the truth that you felt safe sharing. And honestly, I think it makes me love you more, not less. Because you're right. We found something real. Something that has nothing to do with money or status or any of the things the world says should matter. All the things we've been told our whole lives are important. We found each other, really found each other, without all those distractions and complications. We built something authentic and true. She turned to Father Thomas, who was now openly crying himself, his handkerchief pressed to his eyes. I'm ready to say my vows now. If you are, Father, I'm ready to marry this man. The priest, looking both stunned and deeply moved, nodded and dabbed at his eyes. Yes, yes, of course. Please proceed. Emma faced Michael fully, her voice steady and clear and ringing with conviction. Michael James Carter, or just Michael, or whatever name you want to go by, you have shown me what real love looks like. You've taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold, can't be inherited or earned through connections. In choosing you, I chose authenticity over appearance, substance over status, love over comfort and security. You make me want to be a better person, more honest, more true to myself. You make me believe in the goodness of people, in the possibility of genuine connection. I promise to stand by your side through every challenge life brings, to support your choices, whatever they may be, to build a life with you based on mutual respect and genuine affection and real partnership. Whether we eat in five-star restaurants or share pizza on the couch, whether we live in a mansion or a studio apartment, whether we drive luxury cars or that beloved old truck, I will be grateful every day that I get to be with you. I love you, not for what you have or what you can give me, but for who you are at your core, for your kindness and integrity and the way you see the world. There wasn't a dry eye in the church now, even among the skeptics and critics. Even Emma's father was wiping at his face with a handkerchief, his expression transformed from shock to something that might have been admiration, or perhaps regret for his own choices. Rachel was full-on sobbing, mascara running down her face, clinging to the arm of the person next to her. Tony had given up all pretense and was crying openly, his wife patting his back. Mrs. Rosa was standing now, applauding, calling out encouragement in a mix of Italian and English. Father Thomas, his own voice trembling with emotion, continued with the ceremony, his words taking on extra meaning given what had just transpired. They exchanged rings, Michael's symbol band matching Emma's, both symbols of their commitment regardless of wealth or status, both chosen together weeks ago, both perfect in their simplicity. When Michael slid the ring onto Emma's finger, his hands were shaking so badly that she had to help guide it, and they both laughed through their tears. By the power vested in me by God and the state, Father Thomas said with a warm smile, his voice thick but joyful, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Michael, you may kiss your bride. And Michael did, pulling Emma close in a kiss that held all the love, all the relief, all the gratitude, all the hope for their future. It was a kiss that said everything words couldn't capture. A kiss that sealed not just their marriage, but their commitment to living authentically, to choosing love over everything else. The church erupted in applause and cheers, the earlier shock giving way to genuine joy and celebration. People were standing, clapping, some whistling, the sound filling the old church and echoing off the stone walls. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, hands clasped tightly, both still crying and laughing, Emma saw her mother smiling through tears, looking happier than Emma had seen her in years. She saw Michael's friends from the garage whooping and celebrating, Tony pumping his fist in the air. She saw even the skeptical colleagues from her office clapping with what looked like real enthusiasm, caught up in the emotion of the moment. Mrs. Rosa threw rice, even though they'd been told not to, shouting blessings in Italian. At the reception, held in a charming venue with exposed brick walls and twinkling lights, the mood was jubilant and electric. Once the initial shock wore off, people seemed genuinely happy for them, the revelation adding an unexpected fairy tale quality to what had already been an emotional ceremony. Guests who had been skeptical before were now celebrating enthusiastically, as if Michael's wealth validated their relationship in a way that made them comfortable, which Emma found both amusing and slightly sad. But she chose to focus on the joy, on the love, on the celebration of their union. Emma's father approached Michael at the bar, where Michael was getting drinks for himself and Emma. Richard looked humbled in a way Emma had never seen, smaller somehow, less certain. He extended his hand formally, but his eyes were wet. "I owe you an apology," Richard said, his voice gruff with emotion. "A significant one. I judged you unfairly, harshly, based on superficial criteria that I now see were deeply flawed. Any man who would give up a fortune to find real meaning in life, who would work hard when he didn't have to, who would risk everything by being honest even at his own wedding, who would love my daughter when he thought it might cost him everything, that's the kind of man I should have recognized as worthy from the beginning. I was blinded by my own prejudices, my own narrow definitions of success. I'm sorry." Michael shook his hand, holding it firmly. "You were protecting your daughter, sir. You wanted to ensure she'd be taken care of, that she wouldn't struggle or suffer. I respect that deeply. That's what a good father does, even when his daughter doesn't appreciate it in the moment. Call me Richard. We're family now. And for what it's worth, I think Emma made the right choice. You're a good man, with or without the money. I should have seen that sooner." "Thank you, Richard. That means more than you know." Patricia joined them, dabbing at her eyes, her makeup slightly smudged from tears. "I need to apologize too," she said softly. "I pushed so hard for Emma to marry well, to choose security, because that's what I did. But watching you two today, seeing the way you look at each other, the way you chose each other despite everything, I realized that I confused comfort with happiness. You two have something real, something precious. Don't ever take it for granted." Emma appeared at Michael's side, taking his arm, and Patricia embraced her daughter tightly. "I am sorry I didn't support you from the beginning," she whispered. "You were braver than I ever was." As the evening went on, Michael pulled Emma aside to a quiet corner of the venue, away from the celebration, where they could have a moment alone. The music and laughter were muted here, creating a bubble of intimacy amid the party. "I need you to know something important," he said, taking both her hands in his expression serious. "Yes, I have access to my trust fund, which is substantial. Yes, I'm technically a billionaire on paper, though most of that is tied up in the company and investments. But I meant everything I said about living simply, about finding meaning in honest work, about the values I've discovered these past 5 years. I don't want to go back to that world, Emma, not the way it was. I like my garage. I like my life. I like who I've become when I'm not defined by the Carter name. The money can just sit there, earning interest or whatever money does. We don't have to change anything about how we live. Emma smiled, her mind already working through possibilities. What if we used it to change other people's lives instead? What if we kept living simply, authentically, but used the resources to help people? We could fund scholarships for kids who want to learn trades, who want to work with their hands, who don't fit the traditional college path. We could help small businesses get started, people with dreams but no capital. We could support causes we care about, make a real difference in our community. We could have the best of both worlds, a simple, authentic life for us, but the ability to make a significant impact for others. Michael's face lit up with that familiar smile, the one that had first made Emma's heart skip. That's perfect. That's exactly right. See, this is why I love you. You always know how to find the meaning in things, how to see possibilities I wouldn't have thought of. They returned to the party and danced their first dance as husband and wife to an old love song, Etta James crooning about at last finding love. They were surrounded by their eclectic group of wedding guests, this collision of worlds that had somehow come together to celebrate their union. Emma rested her head on Michael's shoulder, feeling his heartbeat, feeling the rightness of this moment, this choice, this man. In that moment, Emma felt overwhelmingly grateful. Grateful that her car had broken down that rainy Tuesday. Grateful that she'd followed her heart despite everyone's objections. Grateful that Michael had trusted her with his truth. Later, as they cut the cake, Rachel approached Emma. "I was so wrong," Rachel said, shaking her head. "I mean, not just about him having money, though that's quite a plot twist, but wrong about judging him at all. I saw the way he looked at you during the vows. I've never seen love like that, Emma. Real, pure, unconditional love. You were right all along." "It's not about being right or wrong," Emma replied, squeezing her friend's hand. "It's about knowing what matters to you and having the courage to choose it, even when everyone says you're crazy." As the night wound down and guests began to leave, saying their goodbyes and offering congratulations that now seemed more enthusiastic than they might have been before the revelation, Emma and Michael prepared to leave for their honeymoon. They'd planned a road trip up the coast in Michael's old truck, the same one he'd driven to that first dinner date, the same one Emma's parents had looked at with barely concealed dismay. Now, knowing what they knew, some people seemed confused by the choice, asking why they weren't flying first class to some exotic destination. But Emma and Michael just smiled at each other, understanding perfectly why the old truck and the coastal drive were exactly right. "Are you happy?" Michael asked as they stood outside the venue, alone for a moment under the stars, the sounds of the party fading behind them, music and laughter drifting out into the night air. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Emma replied honestly, leaning into him. "You know what the funny thing is? Finding out you're wealthy doesn't change how I feel at all, not even a little bit. I loved you when I thought we'd be budgeting carefully for the rest of our lives, eating at cheap restaurants, maybe struggling to make ends meet sometimes. And I love you now with exactly the same intensity. The only difference is now I know you understand exactly what it's like to wonder if people care about you for the right reasons. We've both lived that experience from different angles." "We're quite a pair," Michael said, laughing softly. "Both of us running from privilege in our own ways, both trying to find something real, something genuine. And we found it in each other," Emma finished, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "We found what actually matters." As they drove away in that old truck, tin cans tied to the bumper by Michael's garage friends clanging behind them, creating a cheerful racket, Emma looked back at the venue one last time through the rear window. She thought about the journey that had led her here, about all the times she doubted herself, about the pressure to conform to others' expectations, about the courage it had taken to follow her heart. She'd chosen love over security, authenticity over appearance, and it had led her to something more valuable than any fortune, a partnership built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the kind of love that didn't need material things to validate it. The world would say she got lucky, that she married a poor mechanic who turned out to be rich. But Emma knew the truth. She'd married for love, pure and simple. The wealth was just a detail, a footnote in a much bigger story. The real fortune was the man beside her, the one who'd chosen to live simply to find meaning, who'd worked with his hands when he could have coasted on his name, who'd risked everything by revealing his truth because he valued honesty more than security. That night, as they checked into a modest motel for the first night of their honeymoon, Michael carried their bags inside and Emma followed, laughing.
"We could afford the fanciest hotel on the coast," she teased. "But would we be happier there?" Michael countered, grinning. The room was clean but simple, with floral bedspreads and a slightly outdated television. It was perfect. They sat on the bed, still in their wedding clothes, and just looked at each other. "I should tell you about the company," Michael said. "My father wants me to take over in the next few years. He's ready to retire. I don't know how to balance that with the life I've built." "We'll figure it out together," Emma said. "Maybe you can run the company differently. Maybe you can bring the values you've learned from working at the garage to the corporate world. Treat employees well. Focus on quality and service. Remember that there are real people behind every transaction." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I like that. A different kind of leadership. Or maybe you stay at the garage and hire someone else to run the company. Someone who shares your values," Emma continued, always thinking of options, seeing possibilities. "The point is, we have options now that we didn't think we had before. But having options doesn't mean we have to change who we are or what we value. Money is a tool, not an identity. It can help us do good things, but it doesn't define us." They talked late into the night, making plans, sharing dreams, discussing possibilities, building the framework for their life together. Money was part of the conversation, but only as a tool, not as a goal or a status symbol. The goal was happiness, fulfillment, making a difference, building something meaningful together. They talked about the foundation Emma had mentioned, about specific ways they could help their community, about the balance between living authentically and accepting the responsibility that came with wealth. In the weeks and months that followed, Emma and Michael settled into married life with a grace that surprised even them. They kept Michael's apartment above the deli for a while, modest but cozy, a space that felt like them. The neighborhood embraced Emma as one of their own, especially after word spread about how she'd stood by Michael when she thought he had nothing. She became a regular at the local businesses, at Mama Rosa's, where they'd had their first date, at the corner store where Michael bought his morning coffee, at the community center where she started teaching free marketing workshops for small business owners. Michael continued working at the garage, though he also began consulting with his father's company, slowly preparing to take on a leadership role while maintaining his connection to the hands-on work he loved. He'd go to corporate meetings in the morning, dressed in a suit that felt like a costume, then return to the garage in the afternoon to get his hands dirty, to remember who he really was. Emma would sometimes sit in on the meetings, offering insights from her marketing background, helping Michael navigate the corporate world while staying true to his values. Together, they established the Carter Collins Foundation, deliberately combining both their names to show that this was a partnership,
The foundation provided scholarships to kids from low-income families who wanted to learn trades, who wanted to work with their hands, who didn't fit the traditional college path. They funded vocational schools, provided grants for tools and equipment, created apprenticeship programs that connected young people with experienced mentors. It was Michael's way of honoring the choice he'd made to learn a trade, to find dignity and satisfaction in skilled labor, to understand that not all valuable work requires a 4-year degree. Word of their story spread, of course. The media loved the angle. Billionaire heir works as mechanic, finds true love. But Michael and Emma largely avoided the spotlight, preferring to let their actions speak louder than any interview or photo spread could. Emma's parents, to their credit, came around fully. Richard even started volunteering at the garage on weekends, discovering a love for working with cars he'd never known he had. Patricia joined Emma in her nonprofit work, finding purpose she'd never found in country club committees. On their first anniversary, Michael surprised Emma not with diamonds or a luxury vacation, but with something far more meaningful. He took her back to the garage where they'd first met, which now had a sign out front, Mike and Emma's Auto Repair. "You're my partner in everything," he said, "including this. I couldn't have done any of it without you." Emma cried happy tears, holding him close in that garage that smelled of oil and hard work and new beginnings. They'd proven something important, something the world needed to remember, that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or possessions, but in the relationships we build, the lives we touch, the love we share. That the richest life is one lived authentically, with purpose and passion and genuine connection. Emma had married a mechanic, not knowing he was a billionaire, but more importantly, she'd married a man of integrity, kindness, and depth. The money changed their options, but it didn't change their values or their love. If anything, it strengthened their bond because they knew without a doubt that they'd chosen each other for all the right reasons. As they stood in their garage, their first business together, Emma reflected on how far they'd come. She'd defied her parents, risked her social standing, and chosen love over security. And she'd been rewarded, not just with financial security she never expected, but with something far more valuable, a partnership built on authentic love, mutual respect, and shared values. Michael had given up a fortune to find himself, and in doing so, he'd found Emma. Emma had been willing to live modestly to be with the man she loved, and in doing so, she'd found security she never sought. Together, they discovered that the greatest wealth is loving and being loved for exactly who you are. No pretense, no masks, no conditions. They'd found that working with your hands can be as noble as running a corporation, that service matters more than status, that character counts more than credentials. Their story became a quiet inspiration to others. Young people questioning whether to follow the expected path or forge their own. Couples wondering if love really could conquer practical concerns. Anyone who'd ever felt pressure to be someone they weren't, to want things they didn't actually desire, to measure success by other standards. Years later, when they had children of their own, Emma and Michael would tell them about the day they met in a small garage, about choosing love over convention, about the value of honest work and authentic relationships. They'd teach their children that wealth is a responsibility, not an identity, and that the measure of a person is found in their character, not their bank account. The old truck that Michael had driven on their first date sat in their garage, lovingly maintained, a reminder of where they'd started. Sometimes, on quiet Sunday mornings, they'd take it for a drive, just the two of them, remembering the simplicity of those early days when their whole world was each other, and that was enough. Because it was enough. It always had been. Everything else, the money, the company, the opportunities, those were bonuses. The real gift was finding someone who saw you, truly saw you, and loved what they found. Someone who valued you for your heart, your mind, your soul, not for what you could provide or who you knew or what you owned. Emma had walked down that aisle believing she was marrying a man with little to offer materially, but everything to offer emotionally. Michael had stood at that altar terrified that revealing his truth might cost him the woman he loved. But love, real love, proved stronger than fear, more valuable than wealth, more lasting than any material possession. Their wedding day revelation had shocked everyone in attendance, but in the end, it changed nothing about what really mattered. Emma loved Michael the mechanic. Michael loved Emma, the woman willing to choose him over comfort. The billions in the bank were just a detail in a much more important story about two people brave enough to be themselves and lucky enough to find each other. As the years passed and their story became family legend, told at gatherings and passed down through generations, the moral remained clear. Love is the only wealth that truly matters, the only fortune that grows rather than diminishes when shared, the only investment that pays dividends in joy, meaning, and fulfillment. Emma and Michael had found that wealth in each other. Everything else was just details.